The great chamber of the Galactic Concordat had stood for 12,000 years. Its walls were made of stone from 17 different worlds, each piece representing one of the founding species that had built this alliance. The ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it, and the floor was polished smooth by countless feet, claws, and tentacles that had walked upon it. Ambassador Samuel Wright stood alone in the center of this chamber. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes, wearing the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Behind him sat his aide, a young woman named Katie Morgan, who held a data tablet in her trembling hands. Around them, arranged in a massive circle, sat the representatives of the 17 species. The Thesan delegation occupied the highest seats, their four-eyed faces looking down with cold satisfaction. The Keth collective clicked their mandibles in a sound that might have been laughter. The luminary glowed a deep orange color that Samuel had learned meant pleasure. Even the Ven, who rarely showed emotion, seemed to pulse with approval. High Chancellor Vorix of the Thesan hegemony rose from his seat. He was ancient even by Thesan standards. His scales faded to a dull gray, but his voice still carried across the vast chamber. "The Council of 17 has reached a unanimous decision," Vorix announced. "Humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Concordat. You will have 90 standard cycles to remove all human personnel from Concordat space. Your colonies in the disputed zones will be given to other member species. Your trade licenses are canceled. Your diplomatic status is ended." Samuel did not move. He had expected this verdict for months, ever since the whispers had started in the corridors of power. Humans are growing too fast. Humans are too ambitious. Humans make us nervous. "May I ask a question, High Chancellor?" Samuel said. His voice was calm and steady. "You may. What crime has humanity committed? What law have we broken?" Vorix's four eyes blinked slowly. "No crime, Ambassador. No broken law. But the Concordat has existed in peace for 12,000 years. Your species threatens that peace. How do we threaten it? We have fought no wars. We have broken no treaties." "You grow too quickly," Vorix said. "Your population doubles every century. Your technology advances faster than any species we have ever encountered. Your traders sell goods at prices that our merchants cannot match. Your engineers solve problems that have puzzled our scientists for thousands of years." He paused. "You make the other species uncomfortable." Samuel almost laughed. "Almost, we make them uncomfortable," he repeated. "Yes, and comfort is essential to peace. The Concordat cannot function if its members feel threatened by one of their own. Therefore, humanity must go." Behind Samuel, Katie made a small sound of protest. He silenced her with a slight gesture of his hand. "Very well," Samuel said. "We will comply with the Council's decision. We will leave your space." He turned to Katie. "Send word to Earth. Begin evacuation procedures." As they walked toward the chamber's exit, Katie whispered urgently, "Sir, this is wrong. We have done so much for them. Our doctors have cured diseases that killed millions of their people. Our engineers have built infrastructure on dozens of worlds. Our farmers have ended famines." "I know," Samuel said quietly. "Then why are we not fighting this? Why are we just accepting it?" Samuel paused at the doorway. He looked back at the assembled delegates who were already congratulating each other on their decision. The Thesan were shaking hands with the Keth. The Luminari were glowing brightly with joy. They looked like children who had just gotten rid of an unwanted guest. "Because fighting would prove them right," Samuel said. "They think we are dangerous. If we resist, we become dangerous. So we leave peacefully. We show them who we really are. And what happens to them after we leave?" Samuel was silent for a long moment. "I do not know. But I suspect they will find out how much they needed us." The evacuation began the next day. Human ships lifted off from hundreds of worlds, carrying workers and families back toward Earth on every planet. Humans packed their belongings, closed their businesses, and said goodbye to colleagues and friends they would never see again. On the mining world of Telax 7, a human engineer named Greg Howard spent his last day training his Keth replacement. Greg had worked in the mines for 15 years. maintaining the ancient drilling equipment that extracted valuable minerals from deep beneath the planet's surface. The main drill has a vibration problem, Greg explained, pointing to a massive machine that towered above them. It gets worse in the third cycle of every day. Do not try to fix it. Just let it run. The Keth supervisor, whose name was Vrix, clicked his mandibles impatiently. We have been mining for thousands of years. We do not need lessons from humans. I am just trying to help, Greg said. Your help is no longer wanted. Leave. Greg nodded slowly. He picked up his tool bag and walked toward the transport that would take him off-world. At the ramp, he paused and looked back at the mine one last time. He had practically raised that drill from a broken wreck to a functioning machine. He knew every sound it made, every quirk of its ancient systems. Good luck, he said quietly. Then he boarded the ship and did not look back again. On the agricultural world of Kesher Prime, a young farmer named Danny Cole handed over his irrigation controls to Administrator Skrill of the Keth Collective. Danny had spent 3 years transforming a struggling farm into one of the most productive on the planet. Everything is in the computer, Danny said. Soil reports, planting schedules, pest control procedures. It is all there. Skrill barely glanced at the data. We farmed these lands before your species existed. We do not need your records. Danny shrugged. Okay. But one thing you should know. The northern filtration plant makes a strange noise every few days. Sounds like it is breaking, but it is not. Whatever you do not replace the compressor. If you do, the whole system will fail. Skrill did not respond. He was already walking away, eager to take control of his new territory. Danny watched him go, then boarded the last transport off Kesher Prime. As the ship rose into the sky, he looked down at the green fields he had worked so hard to create. He wondered how long they would stay green. Across the Concordat, similar scenes played out. Humans left behind detailed instructions, careful warnings, and sincere offers to help with the transition. And across the Concordat, those instructions were ignored. Those warnings were dismissed, and those offers were rejected. The aliens did not need human help. They had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They had built empires and conquered worlds and developed technologies beyond human imagination. What could humans possibly know that they did not? Samuel Wright was the last human to leave Concordat space. He stood on the bridge of the transport ship Horizon, watching the border beacon flash in the darkness ahead. Ambassador, Katie said softly, we are clear. We are in human space now. Samuel nodded. He felt tired, old, and sad. But beneath the sadness, there was something else. Something that felt almost like certainty. They will call us back, he said quietly. Sir, they do not know it yet. They do not understand what they have done. But someday, they will realize that they made a terrible mistake. And when that day comes, they will ask us to return. Katie looked at him with surprise. How can you be so sure? Samuel smiled, but there was no joy in it. Because we did not just work for them, Katie. We held them together. We filled the gaps they did not even know existed. We solved problems they did not know they had. He watched the border beacon disappear behind them. They pushed us out. Now they will learn what it means to stand alone. The ship flew on into human space, leaving the Galactic Concordat behind. And in the great chamber where humanity's fate had been decided, the 17 species celebrated their victory. Unaware that their civilization had just begun to die, 6 months passed after the humans left. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The Concordat continued as it always had. Ships traveled between worlds. Trade flowed through the space stations. The Council of 17 met and made decisions and congratulated themselves on removing the human problem. Then the problems began. On Thesan Prime, the capital world of the hegemony, the air began to smell wrong. It was a subtle change at first, barely noticeable. But within weeks, people started coughing. Children developed breathing problems. The elderly grew weak and tired. Chief Engineer Torak was called to investigate the atmospheric processors. These were ancient machines, built during the founding era, maintained by generations of Thesan engineers. But 30 years ago, A human engineering team had upgraded the filtration systems. They had connected new parts to old ones, creating a hybrid system that worked far better than either system alone. Now, without humans to maintain those upgrades, the hybrid system was failing. Torak stood in the main control room, staring at a junction box that should not have existed. A human technician had built it from parts taken from 3 different machines. The components were held together with metal wire and some kind of sticky tape. According to Thesan engineering principles, it should not work at all, but it had worked perfectly for 28 years. "How do we fix this?" his assistant asked. Torak did not answer immediately. He studied the junction box, trying to understand the logic behind its design. There was no logic. The human who built it had simply grabbed whatever was available and made it work through pure stubbornness. "I do not know," Torak finally admitted. "I cannot understand how it worked in the first place. Can we replace it with a proper Thesan system?" "We could try. But the human modifications are connected to everything. If we remove them, we might crash the entire atmospheric network." The assistant's 4 eyes widened with fear. "Then millions would die." "Yes," Torak said quietly. "Millions would die." He sent an urgent message to the council, requesting help from other species. But the other species had their own problems. On the Luminari homeworld, the medical crisis had already begun. The Luminari were a beautiful species, their bodies made of living light that shifted and changed with their emotions. But they suffered from a terrible disease, a degenerative condition that slowly dimmed their light until they faded away completely. Human doctors, working with Luminari physicians, had developed a treatment that slowed the disease by 60%. The treatment required constant adjustments based on each patient's response. Human doctors made these adjustments naturally, reading subtle changes in the patient's light that told them when something was wrong. Now, without human doctors, the Luminari physicians struggled to continue the treatment. They had all the records, all the data, all the procedures, but the records contained notes like patients seemed dimmer in the blue range, adjusted medication accordingly. They did not explain how to see the dimness or how to know the right adjustment. Dr. Kell, the leading Luminari neurologist, sat in her office and reviewed patient files with growing despair. 17 patients had died in the past month. Dozens more were getting worse. "The humans seemed to guess," she told a colleague. "They made decisions based on feelings instead of data." "That is not science," the colleague said. "No, but it worked. And now our people are dying because we cannot guess the way they did." Kell sent messages to every medical institution in the Concordat, asking if anyone understood human medical intuition. No one did. The humans had a gift for reading living things, for sensing problems before they became visible. It was not a skill that could be taught or copied. The Venn Collective faced a different kind of disaster. The Venn were a hive-minded species. Millions of individuals connected through a network of chemical signals and electromagnetic pulses. They thought together, felt together, existed as one vast consciousness spread across the stars. This connection was made possible by a communications array that humans had helped design. The array amplified the Venn's natural signals, allowing them to maintain their hive mind across interstellar distances. Without it, they would fragment into isolated groups, each one cut off from the others. The humans had left complete instructions for maintaining the array. The Venn studied these instructions carefully. They understood every component, every frequency, every protocol. They were, after all, one of the most intelligent species in the Concordat, but they did not understand maintenance. Human engineers maintained machines the way human doctors treated patients, through constant watching, small adjustments, and an almost magical sense of when something was about to break. The Venn had no such sense. Their hive mind was excellent at logic and pattern recognition, but it could not grasp the human concept of fixing something before it breaks. Within a year, the array began to fail. Small problems led to bigger problems. Connections dropped. Signals weakened. The great Venn Collective, which had existed as one mind for thousands of years, began to split apart. 17 isolated groups emerged. each one trapped on its own world, desperately trying to reconnect with the others. The loneliness was unbearable. The Ven had never been alone before. They did not know how to exist as separate beings. Some went mad. Others simply stopped functioning, their individual units shutting down one by one, unable to survive without the collective. On Nexus Station, the largest trading hub in the Concordat, the economic collapse began quietly. Humans had been everywhere in the Concordat's commercial systems. Not at the top, they were too new for that, but in the middle and at the bottom. Human cargo handlers who knew exactly how to load ships efficiently, human mechanics who could fix anything with spare parts and creativity, human traders who connected buyers and sellers across species boundaries. Without them, everything slowed down. Shipping costs increased. Deliveries took longer. Supply chains that humans had optimized over 2 centuries began to fall apart. A Keth merchant named Shurik watched her cargo rot in a storage unit. The transport ship that should have arrived last week was stuck at a repair dock on the other side of the sector. "Why is the ship delayed?" she demanded. "They need replacement parts," the dock supervisor explained. "Very specific parts. The humans used to make them in a small factory on Earth. Very cheap, very good quality. Nobody else makes them. Then find someone who can. We have tried. The Thiessen quote was 40 times the human price, and they cannot deliver for a year. The Luminari do not work with these materials. The Ven are not answering our communications." Churik's mandibles clicked with frustration. "The humans made everything look so easy." "Yes," the supervisor agreed. "That was the problem, was it not?" On Kasher Prime, Administrator Skrill stood in fields that had once been green and full of life. Now they were brown and dead, stretching to the horizon in every direction. The northern filtration plant had failed, just as Danny Cole had warned. A Keth technician had heard the strange noise and decided to fix it. He replaced the compressor with a new one. Within a week, the entire irrigation system had crashed. Without water, the crops died. Without crops, the food supplies ran out. 1 billion Keth citizens faced starvation. Skrill remembered Danny Cole standing in this exact spot, handing over the control codes, trying to explain about the compressor. Skrill had not listened. He had been too proud, too certain that the Keth did not need human help. Now he understood. The humans had not just maintained the systems, they had kept them alive through methods that made no logical sense. They had built relationships with machines, learning their quirks and weaknesses, treating them almost like living things. The Keth could not do that. Their minds did not work that way. Skrill picked up a handful of dead soil and let it fall through his claws. He thought about the human farmer who had tried to help him. He felt something he had never felt before: regret across the Concordat. The story was the same. Systems failed. Economies collapsed. People died. And everywhere the aliens asked the same question: why did the humans not warn us? But the humans had warned them. They had left instructions and explanations and offers of help. The aliens simply had not listened. Now it was too late. The cracks in the Concordat's foundation were spreading, and no one knew how to stop them. 2 years after the humans left, the Galactic Concordat was dying. The Council of 17 no longer had 17 members. 6 species had stopped attending meetings, too consumed by their own disasters to participate in galactic politics. The Great Chamber, once filled with the sounds of debate and negotiation, now echoed with empty silence. High Chancellor Vorik sat in his seat and looked at the remaining delegates. They looked tired and scared. The confidence that had filled this room on the day of the human expulsion was gone, replaced by desperation. "We must discuss the situation honestly," Vorik began. "Our civilization is in crisis. The reports from across the Concordat are worse each day." A Thiessen minister rose to speak. "Thiessen Prime's atmospheric processors are failing. We have lost 3 cities to toxic air. Our engineers work constantly, but they cannot maintain the human modifications. We estimate complete system failure within 18 months. A Luminari delegate glowed a sickly yellow. "Our people are dying. The treatment protocols the humans developed require adjustments that we cannot make. Our best doctors have tried everything, but they cannot see what the human doctors saw. This month alone, we lost 4,000 patients. The Venn representative spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. The collective is broken. We exist now as 17 separate minds, isolated and alone. We cannot rebuild the communications array. We do not have the knowledge. We do not have the intuition. One by one, the delegates reported their disasters. Failing power plants, collapsing infrastructure, broken supply chains, famines, plagues, economic collapse. A Keth politician named Thrix stood up angrily. This is coincidence, he insisted. We ruled the stars for 12,000 years before the humans came. We can survive without them. Can we? Vorex asked quietly. Look around this chamber, Delegate Thrix. Look at the empty seats. Look at the fear in every face. Does this look like survival? Thrix clicked his mandibles but said nothing. The truth is painful, but we must accept it, Vorex continued. The humans were not just workers and traders and engineers. They were the glue that held us together. They filled gaps we did not know existed. They solved problems we did not know we had. And now that they are gone, we are falling apart. Then we must develop their capabilities ourselves, another delegate said. We must learn to do what they did. Vorex shook his head. We have tried. For 2 years, our best minds have studied human methods. They have read human books and watched human recordings and analyzed human solutions. But why cannot reproduce the results? Why not? A Thesan scientist stood to answer. Because human abilities are not skills that can be learned. They are a way of thinking, a way of approaching problems. Humans improvise. They experiment. They try things that make no logical sense, and somehow they work. Our species cannot think that way. Our minds are too organized, too logical, too rigid. The chamber fell silent. The delegates looked at each other, seeing their own fear reflected in alien eyes. Then what do we do? Someone asked. No one answered. On Thesan Prime, Chief Engineer Torak worked through another sleepless night. The atmospheric processors were failing faster now. Toxic air had killed over 1 million people. The death toll was rising daily. Torak stared at the human junction box that had caused so much trouble. He had studied it for months, trying to understand its design. He had brought in experts from across the hegemony. None of them could explain how it worked. Should not function, his assistant said for the 100th time. The components are incompatible. The wiring is wrong. The power flow is impossible. And yet it worked for nearly 30 years, Torak replied. The human who built it did not care about compatibility or proper wiring. He just made it work. Torak thought about that question. He thought about the human engineers he had worked with before the expulsion. They had been strange people, always joking and improvising, never following the standard procedures. Torak had considered them unprofessional. Now he realized they had been geniuses. They did not think about how things should work, Torak said slowly. They only thought about how things could work. They saw possibilities where we saw rules. Can we learn to see those possibilities? Torak looked at his assistant, then at the failing junction box, then at the toxic readings on his display. We do not have time to learn. By the time we figure out how to think like humans, everyone on this planet will be dead. On the Luminary homeworld, Dr. Kell watched another patient fade away. The woman had been young and strong, her light bright and beautiful. Now, she was dim, barely visible, her consciousness slipping away. I am sorry, Kell whispered. I tried everything. The woman's light flickered weakly. Not your fault, she managed to say. The humans. They could see things. We cannot see. Her light went out. Kell sat in the darkness for a long time, feeling the weight of her failure. She had studied the human treatment records until she knew them by heart. She had analyzed every adjustment, every decision, every note. But the records only told her what the humans had done, not how they had known to do it. The humans had a gift. They could look at a living thing and somehow understand it, feel its pain, sense its needs. It was not science. It was something deeper, something almost magical. Kel did not have that gift. No luminary did, and so her people were dying one by one. Their lights going out across the homeworld, like stars disappearing from the sky. The Venn fragments grew more desperate each day. The 17 isolated groups tried everything to reconnect. They built new transmitters. They boosted their signals. They sent physical messengers on slow ships between worlds. Nothing worked. A Venn leader named Seven of Many sat alone in her chamber and tried to remember what it felt like to be part of the collective. The memories were fading. Soon she would forget entirely, and she would become something new, something terrible and individual. The thought filled her with horror. Venn were not meant to be individuals. They were meant to be together, one vast mind, sharing thoughts and experiences in existence. Without the collective, they were nothing. She thought about the human engineers who had built the communications array. They had worked for years on the project, treating it like a personal mission. They had seemed to understand what the array meant to the Venn, how important it was to their identity and survival. One human, a woman named Lisa Perry, had spent hours talking with Seven of Many about the collective. She had asked questions that no one else had ever asked. What does it feel like to share minds? How do you maintain individual identity within the whole? What happens when you disagree? Seven of Many had found the questions strange. Humans were individual creatures, separate and alone. How could they understand what it meant to be part of something greater? But Lisa had seemed to understand. She had nodded and smiled and said that humans also sought connection, also feared loneliness, also wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. That is why we help, Lisa had said. We know what it means to be alone. We do not want anyone else to feel that way. Now Seven of Many understood those words. She understood loneliness. She understood isolation. She understood the desperate need for connection. And she understood, finally, why the humans had been so valuable. Not because of their technical skills or their economic contributions or their medical knowledge. Those things mattered, but they were not the most important thing. The most important thing was that humans cared. They genuinely, deeply cared about other beings, even beings who were completely different from them. They helped, not because it benefited them, but because helping was simply what they did. The Concordat had expelled the humans for being different, for being uncomfortable, for being too much. Now the Concordat was learning that too much was exactly what they needed. Seven of Many made a decision. She would send a message to Earth. She would beg the humans to return. It was a desperate gamble. The humans had every reason to refuse. They had been treated badly, thrown out like garbage, their contributions dismissed, and their warnings ignored. But Seven of Many had to try. Because without the humans, the Concordat would not survive, and neither would the Venn. 3 years after the expulsion, High Chancellor Vorex called an emergency meeting of the Council. Only 11 species sent representatives. The others were too broken to participate. Vorex stood at the center of the great chamber, looking older than he had ever looked. His scales had turned pale gray, and his 4 eyes were dim with exhaustion. I have called this meeting to discuss a proposal, he said. A proposal that many of you will find difficult to accept. But we have no choice. Our civilization is dying, and there is only one way to save it. The delegates waited in tense silence. We must ask the humans to return. The reaction was immediate. Voices rose in protest. Mandibles clicked in anger. Lights flashed in shock. Impossible, a Keth delegate shouted. They will demand revenge. They will make us suffer for what we did to them. They will want control, another added. They will take over the Concordat and turn us into servants. They will never forgive us, a Luminari delegate said, glowing a fearful blue. We threw them out. We ignored their warnings. We let millions die because we were too proud to listen. Why would they help us now? Vorex raised his hand for silence. The chamber slowly quieted. You may be right, he admitted. The humans have every reason to hate us. They have every reason to refuse. But what choice do we have? Our atmospheric systems are failing. Our medical systems are collapsing. Our economy is in ruins. Our people are dying. If we do not ask for help, we will not survive another decade. Then we will die with dignity, the Keth delegate said proudly. We will not beg. Dignity. Vorax's voice turned sharp. What dignity is there in extinction? What honor is there in watching your children starve because you were too proud to ask for help? He looked around the chamber. I have lived a long time. I have seen many things, but I have never seen anything as foolish as pride that leads to death. The chamber fell silent again. The delegates looked at each other, seeing their own doubt reflected in alien eyes. Finally, a Ven representative spoke. The humans may refuse, but we must try. The alternative is the end of everything we have built. One by one, the other delegates nodded. Even the Keth delegate eventually lowered his head in agreement. Very well, Vorax said. I will send a message to Earth myself. I will ask for a meeting with their leaders. I will offer whatever terms are necessary. He paused, looking at the empty seats around the chamber. And I will apologize. For all of us, the message reached Earth 3 days later. It was received by the office of President Linda Harris, who read it with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. She called her advisors. Together in the conference room of the presidential residence, Secretary of State Marcus Webb sat to her right. Defense Secretary Olivia Grant sat to her left. Around the table were the heads of various government agencies and military commanders. The Concordat wants us back, Linda announced. High Chancellor Vorax has personally requested a meeting. He says they are willing to offer any terms we want. Marcus leaned forward eagerly. This is an incredible opportunity, Madam President. We could demand territorial concessions, economic advantages, political power. We could reshape the entire galactic order, could demand reparations, Olivia added. They threw us out like trash. They ignored every warning we gave them. Now they want us to save them? Make them pay. Linda listened to her advisors argue about terms and conditions and demands. She understood their anger. She shared it. 3 years ago, she had watched the human evacuation from her office window. Seeing families torn from their homes, workers forced to abandon their life's work, diplomats humiliated and expelled. It had been painful. It had been unjust. It had been wrong. But Linda was not thinking about the past. She was thinking about the future. What if we ask for nothing? She said quietly. The room fell silent. Her advisors stared at her in disbelief. Nothing, Marcus repeated. Madame President, with respect, they owe us everything. They caused untold suffering to our people. They nearly destroyed our economy. They treated us like second-class citizens for 2 centuries and then threw us out when we became too successful. How can we ask for nothing? Because asking for something will not give us what we really need, Linda replied. Think about it. If we demand punishment, we get partners who resent us. If we demand control, we get allies who are looking for any chance to betray us. If we demand payment, we get workers who will do the minimum required and nothing more. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, billions of aliens were struggling to survive. Some of them had cheered when humanity was expelled. Some of them had celebrated in the streets, but most of them were ordinary people who had nothing to do with the council's decision. Factory workers and farmers and doctors and teachers, families trying to raise their children, young people trying to build their futures. They did not deserve to die for their leaders' mistakes. If we return with demands and conditions, we will never be truly accepted, Linda continued. We will always be outsiders, tolerated but not trusted. But if we return with open hands and generous hearts, we show them who we really are. We show them that humanity is not a threat. We show them that we can be trusted. They will see it as weakness, Olivia warned.
At first, maybe.
But over time, they will see it as strength. The strength to forgive. The strength to help those who hurt us. The strength to build rather than destroy. Linda turned back to her advisors. That is the kind of species I want humanity to be. Not conquerors. Not Avengers helpers. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Marcus sighed. That is a risk, Madam President. A huge risk. I know. But I believe it is the right risk to take. She sat back down at the table and looked at each of her advisors in turn. We will return to the Concordat. We will help them rebuild. We will ask for nothing in return except the chance to be their partners, their friends, their equals. And we will show them that humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our adaptability or our intelligence. It is our compassion. The advisors looked at each other. Some were skeptical. Some were uncertain. But all of them could see the determination in their president's eyes. Very well, Marcus said finally. I will prepare a response to High Chancellor Vorex. What would you like to say? Linda smiled. Tell him we accept his invitation. Tell him we are coming home. And tell him that we forgive him. The message reached the Concordat a week later. Vorex read it 3 times, certain he had misunderstood. The humans were returning. They were asking for nothing. They were offering forgiveness. He had expected demands. He had expected anger. He had expected revenge. Instead, he received grace. For the first time in 3 years, Vorex felt something like hope. He did not understand humans. He probably never would. But he was beginning to realize that was exactly the point. Humans were different. They thought differently, felt differently, acted differently. And maybe, just maybe, that difference was not something to fear. Maybe it was something to embrace. He sent word to the remaining members of the council. The humans were coming. Not as conquerors or saviors or masters, as friends the human fleet arrived at. Station 6 months after the message was sent. It was not a military fleet. There were no warships, no weapons platforms, no troops. Instead, there were cargo vessels loaded with supplies. Hospital ships filled with doctors and medicine, engineering craft carrying tools and spare parts, agricultural transports bringing seeds and equipment. The aliens watched the fleet approach with a mixture of hope and fear. They remembered the expulsion, the cruel words, the celebrations when the humans left. They wondered if the humans remembered, too, Ambassador Samuel Wright. Now older and grayer, but still standing straight, was the first human to step onto Nexus Station. He was greeted by High Chancellor Vorex, who bowed lower than any Thesan had ever bowed to a human. Ambassador Wright, Vorex said, on behalf of the Galactic Concordat, I welcome you back, and I apologize for everything. Samuel smiled gently. There's no need for apologies, High Chancellor. The past is the past. We are here to build a future. The reconstruction began immediately on Thesan Prime. A team of human engineers went to work on the failing atmospheric processors. Their leader was a woman named Beth Palmer. A quiet person with steady hands and a brilliant mind, Beth stood in the main control room with Chief Engineer Torak, examining the famous junction box that had caused so much trouble. Can you fix it? Torak asked. Beth studied the box for a long moment. Then she smiled. I think so. But first, tell me what happened. Torak explained everything. The failing systems, the toxic air, the deaths, the desperate attempts to understand human modifications. Beth listened without judgment. When Torak finished, she nodded slowly. The junction box creates a resonance field that stabilizes the filtration frequency, she explained. The original designer probably did not even know why it worked. He just tried different combinations until something clicked. That is not engineering, Torak said. That is guessing. It is both, Beth replied. Human engineering is about understanding principles, yes, but also about trusting instincts. We feel when something is right, even if we cannot explain it. She looked at Torak. No, I can fix the system. But I can also teach you how we think. If you want to learn, Torak hesitated. For thousands of years, the Thesan had believed their methods were superior, systematic, logical, correct, accepting. That humans had something to teach them meant accepting that they had been wrong, but millions of his people had died because of that. Pride, yes, Torak said. I want to learn. On the Luminary homeworld, human medical teams worked alongside local doctors. A young physician named Chris Santos spent his days treating patients and his nights teaching luminary doctors how to see. It is not about instruments, Chris explained to Dr. Kell. Instruments show you numbers and readings and data, but they cannot show you the whole picture. You have to look at the patient. Really look. Do look, Kell said, frustrated. I look at everything. You look at parts. You look at symptoms, but you do not look at the person. Chris gestured at a patient resting nearby. Watch her light. Do not analyze it. Just watch. Kell watched. At first, she saw nothing unusual. The patient's light was dim, as expected for her condition. The readings were stable, but then Kell noticed something. A slight flicker in the patient's lower spectrum. A brief dimming that lasted only a fraction of a second. I see it, she said, surprised. The flicker. That flicker tells you she is stressed, Chris said. Her body is fighting something. The numbers will not show it for another week, but her light shows it now. He adjusted the treatment. We just gave her body the help it needs before the crisis hits. Kell watched the patient's light slowly brighten. She had been practicing medicine for decades, but she had never seen her patients this way before. How do you know what the flicker means? She asked. Chris shrugged. I do not know how to explain it. I just feel it. But the more you watch, the more you will feel it too. It takes time. It takes patience. But you can learn. The Venn Collective was the greatest challenge. The 17 fragments had been isolated for years, their connections shattered, their unity destroyed. A team of human engineers worked on the communications array for 18 months. Their leader was a man named Paul Jensen, who spent most of his time listening rather than working. Tell me about the collective, Paul asked a Venn representative named Seven of Many. What did it feel like? Seven of Many tried to explain. She described the warmth of shared consciousness, the comfort of never being alone, the joy of thinking together. She described the terrible loneliness of isolation, the horror of being trapped in a single mind. Paul listened to every word. He asked questions. He took notes. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding, not just fixing. We will reconnect you, Paul promised. But it will take time. The array is more than just technology. It is a part of your identity. We need to understand that identity before we can repair the system. Why do you care so much? Seven of Many asked. We treated your people badly. We celebrated when you were expelled. Paul was quiet for a moment. Humans know what it means to be lonely, he said. We are born alone, and we die alone. Everything in between is just trying to connect with others. He smiled. When we see someone who is lonely, we want to help. It is just who we are. Seven of Many did not fully understand, but she trusted Paul. And when the array finally came back online 18 months later, when the 17 fragments merged back into one collective, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Gratitude. 5 years after the return. The Concordat had changed. The immediate crises were over. The atmospheric systems worked. The medical protocols were effective. The economy was recovering. The Venn were whole again, but the deeper change was in how the species related to each other. Humans had spread across the Concordat, working alongside aliens on every world. They taught and they learned. They shared their methods and absorbed new ideas. They built bridges between species that had never communicated before. The old Concordat had been a collection of separate empires, united by treaties, but divided by suspicion. The new Concordat was becoming something different, something more connected, something more alive. President Linda Harris addressed a joint session of the Council on the 5th anniversary of the return. The Great Chamber was full for the first time in years. Representatives from all 17 species sat in their seats, watching the human leader with respect. 5 years ago, Linda began, you asked us to return. You expected us to demand payment for our help. You expected us to seek revenge for how we had been treated. You expected us to act as conquerors. She paused, looking around the chamber. Instead, we came as friends. We asked for nothing except the chance to help. And today, I stand before a Concordat that is stronger, more united, and more hopeful than it has been in thousands of years. The delegates listened in silence. You pushed us out, Linda continued. You watched your civilization collapse. You learned what it meant to stand alone. And then you did something remarkable. You admitted your mistake. You asked for help. You opened yourselves to change. That takes courage. That takes humility. That is the foundation of everything we have built together. Linda looked at High Chancellor Vorex, who sat in his traditional seat at the head of the chamber. He was old now, but his eyes were bright with life. We do not want to rule the Concordat, Linda said. We do not want to dominate or control or conquer. We want to be partners. We want to build something great together. Not a human empire. Not a Thesan hegemony. Not a Keth collective. A true alliance of equals, where every species contributes its strengths and supports the others in their weaknesses. She raised her hand toward the gathered delegates. Together, we are more than any of us could be alone. That is the lesson of these past 5 years. That is the truth that will carry us forward into the future. We are not separate species competing for power. We are one civilization reaching for the stars. The chamber erupted in applause. Clicks and glows and pulses filled the air. The sounds of 17 species united in hope. In the back of the chamber, Katie Morgan, now a senior diplomat, stood beside Ambassador Samuel Wright. They watched the celebration together, remembering the cold silence of the expulsion chamber all those years ago. Do you think it will last? Katie asked. Samuel watched the delegates congratulating each other, sharing jokes, building friendships. Nothing lasts forever, he said. But this is a good start. He thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain of expulsion, the years of isolation, the desperate call for help. The decision to return with forgiveness instead of anger. Humanity had been tested, and they had passed. Not by proving they were stronger or smarter or better than the other species, but by proving they were kinder. That, Samuel realized, was humanity's true strength. Not technology or adaptability or intelligence, kindness, compassion, the willingness to help others, even those who had hurt them. The Concordat had pushed humans out and watched their civilization collapse. But in the end, they had also watched something else. They had watched humanity rise to the challenge. Not with weapons or demands or revenge, with open hands and generous hearts. And that, more than anything else, was what made humans human. The celebration continued late into the night, and somewhere in the Great Chamber, representatives from 17 species made plans for tomorrow, together the way it was always meant to be.